Hello, and welcome to Exposition, a podcast produced by the Division of Social and Human Sciences, Northeast Campus, Tarrant County College. Prepare to be engaged, enlightened, and informed. Today's topic.
Hello. Our topic today is a movie that I've wanted to talk about and have students watch for quite some time. Judgment at Nuremberg. I know at some point we need to change the introduction to welcome you to Watch Wisely. I am one of your hosts and the namesake of this podcast, Dr. Karen Wisely. I teach history here at Tarrant County College Northeast Campus. Joining me is our co-host.
Hi, I'm Samantha Elkins. I also teach history here at Northeast Campus.
All right. As is our custom, I will introduce our movie topic by reading the logline or brief description of the film and then go over the main cast members and where you may have seen them before. This type of information helps me when I watch movies, and so I hope that it helps you as well. For Judgment at Nuremberg, the logline is, in 1948, an American court in occupied Germany tries 4 Nazi judges for war crimes. That's it. That's succinct, isn't it?
You can tell this movie's a little older.
Yeah. I think it's important to note that Judgment at Nuremberg was the first major motion picture to discuss the Holocaust and the extermination of the Jews by Nazis, and to include footage of the liberation of the concentration camps. This movie has just a stunning cast full of so many really important Hollywood stars. Spencer Tracy is Chief Judge Dan Haywood. You may know him from such important films as Inherit the Wind, which is a fictionalized version of the Scopes monkey trial from the 1920s. He made a whole bunch of really awesome movies with Katharine Hepburn, with whom he had a romantic relationship in real life, including Death Set, Pat and Mike, Woman of the Year, and multiple others. Adam's Ribs. I'm just not going to name them all. Or you may know him from his very last film, which is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which explored interracial relationships in 1967, the year that Loving v. Virginia Supreme Court case made interracial marriage legal in the United States. There are tons more, because I didn't even mention his 2 Oscar-winning films, but I promise I'll try to make the rest of these a little bit shorter. Burt Lancaster is defendant Dr. Ernst Janning. When I think of Burt Lancaster, I think of Field of Dreams.
Oh, yeah.
Where he plays old Doc Graham, the guy who steps off the field and loses his opportunity to relive his youth on the baseball field because he has to save a little girl who chokes on a hot dog. And yes, sure, he won an Oscar for Elmer Gantry, but Field of Dreams is what's really important here, folks. Richard Vidmark is prosecutor Colonel Tad Lawson, and he's been in just a ton of things, including The Alamo, Kiss of Death, How the West Was Won, and Coma, which was a movie that scared the bejesus out of me when I was a small child. Maximilian Schell is the defense counsel, Hans Rolf. He's an Austrian and a native speaker of German, I should say. So he is kind of typecast as random German guy in every movie that he's in, but he is so good in this movie. He won an Academy Award for it.
Well deserved.
Marlene Dietrich is Frau Berthold. She has been in a lot of movies and is a pretty famous face. She's one of the people who is name-checked in Madonna's Vogue. Destry Rides Again, Shanghai Express, Around the World in 80 Days, Witness for the Prosecution. I'm sure that our Gen Z students have not heard of any of these. Montgomery Clift is Rudolph Peterson. You may know him No, you don't. From, sorry, I'm getting real negative here. From The Misfits, From Here to Eternity, and so many others. But Montgomery Clift is an interesting character in Hollywood because he had an eventful life. He was a stunningly handsome man, so they paired him with a lot of women, but the truth is he was gay. And it tormented him to the extent that he had a horrific car accident from which he had to have his face completely reconstructed. And then he, gave up dating women at all, but he didn't really come out because you couldn't really come out and still be employed. So he, it really wore on his mental well-being. And 10 years after the car accident, he died. Judy Garland, speaking of tormented people, Judy Garland played Irene Hoffman, and the only place you need to know of her is Wizard of Oz. She's Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz. That's all that needs to be said. William Shatner is Captain Harrison Byers, but William Shatner really is Captain James T. Kirk in the original Star Trek. In this movie, he is super duper young and very handsome, and he also wasn't doing the annoying overacting thing that he does in Star Trek.
I love Star Trek, so I was like, oh my gosh, it's Captain Kirk. I was so excited, and I can't not tell you how weirded out I was to see Captain Kirk talk to Dorothy from The Wizards of Oz at one point. I was like, these are worlds colliding that are what?
Yeah, that should never happen. I was waiting for him to do that stupid pause thing that he does, that, like, I'm waiting for you to say something. And the last one I'm going to mention is mainly for me. It's Werner Klemperer, who is Defendant Emil Hahn, and he was Colonel Klink in Hogan's Heroes, which I'm sure that none of you have ever seen, but if you haven't, gosh darn it, you should. Anyway, Judgment at Nuremberg was released in 1961. It was written by Abby Mann, who won an Academy Award for it, and it was directed by Stanley Kramer. It's a 3-hour-long movie. Go into it knowing that, but it's good.
Oh, man. It's so good. Because if you've been following our podcast at all, you've noticed we've done a lot of 3-hour movies up till this point. And I remember opening it up going, oh, it's another 3-hour movie. And not only that, because it came out in 1961, it is not the pacing of movies that come out today. I say today, this is 2023. And so, like, it has these very slow scenes at the beginning, and I won't lie, they get in the car, and it does the, like, moving background behind the car that's so clearly, like, old Hollywood.
Are you telling me that they weren't really in Nuremberg? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Believe it.
Oh, my God.
Oh, gosh.
Magic is gone.
I know. I've ruined it. No, I haven't, because I swear it's a really good movie. And it was like, I remember watching it, and I was like, I turned to my husband who's watching it with me, and I went, maybe I just don't like courthouse movies? And then 10 minutes later, I was eating my own words, because I was like, this is so good.
Yeah.
So get through the first, like, 10 minutes. I'll admit that's the slowest part of the whole film. And then the rest of it, it's just really, really, really good.
Yeah, pretty much as soon as they introduce Richard Widmark, it's he brings so much intensity to his role as the prosecutor that it's like,
oh my
whoa,
gosh,
dude, calm down for a second. But he is like, let's try them all.
Yeah.
Who's not guilty and all of, and
the righteous anger, and you really like feel it from him.
Yeah, you do. And, like the first time he speaks, he gets way ahead of the interpreter and has to slow down and all that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he is the driving force of this movie. And as soon as he comes on the scene, it's not slow anymore at any point. So, yeah. All right. So there's how are we going to go with this? I guess we'll talk about what it is. And the trials at Nuremberg, of course, are the Nazi war criminal trials, and it's done military tribunal style, but they bring in judges from the different countries, and in this case, it's the United States. And they form a panel of judges, and they try people. And this is 2+ years into the Nuremberg trials.
At this point, they've already tried all the basically all the higher ups within Hitler's regime.
Yeah, I believe Goering has already been even executed. Yeah. And most of the familiar names. So these are more like political officials at a local level who were doing some of the damage. And the 4 men who are on trial were judges who sentenced people to death. Based on the unjust laws of the Nazi regime. And so the question that has to be answered is, should they be held responsible for enforcing and upholding laws, which is what judges are supposed to do when the laws are so clearly unjust. And it really gets into the nitty gritty here with that. There's a lot of argument. There's a lot of different points of view that are put forward. Some of the cases that they're being that these judges are being on trial for are for sterilization of people who are seen as mentally incompetent. Some of them are an older Jewish gentleman was
accused of having a relationship with like a 16-year-old girl, and therefore he is executed for this.
A 16-year-old Aryan.
Oh yeah, Aryan girl. Make it clear who is. Yeah. Who's Dorothy?
Who's Judy Garland. And so you have a lot of different things. There's the seeing Jews as a race of people kind of thing. There's the eugenics part that's brought into it, and then hey, where did those Nazis get that eugenics idea, by the way? They're very clear in this movie about where the Nazis got the pattern for the eugenics kind of sterilization and murders later of mentally inferior and physically inferior people. They got it from us. They brought it directly from the United States, and the defense attorney even quotes in his defense Oliver Wendell Holmes, who is a Supreme Court justice, a very well-known Supreme Court justice, in his ruling in the case of Buck versus Bell. It was from 1920 something, I think, 1925 maybe.
It was in the 1920s.
Yeah. And in Buck versus Bell, you had the case of a woman who was deemed to be mentally deficient, who is the daughter of someone who's mentally deficient, who had been raped and gave birth to another daughter who they were afraid were going to be mentally deficient, and so they wanted to sterilize her. And the Oliver Wendell Holmes quote was, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. And
jeez. Yeah.
So so there's a lot to come to terms with here.
the whole movie, it especially the first half, is all about like nuance when looking at all this. And I was laughing to my husband as I watched it. I was like, it asks all these questions of like, where does the blame lie? Who should really be punished? Should the people be punished? Where do you draw the line on who should go on trial and who shouldn't go on trial for these crimes that were committed under the Nazi regime? Especially because at this point in the movie, the idea is that they're far enough away from it that they're like, oh, the German people want to move on. They don't think any of these people should be on trial anymore, and they just want to move on with their lives and everything like that. And it's a common theme throughout the whole movie that they're like, well, we didn't know. Well, we didn't know. Well, we didn't know. And so it starts asking you all those questions, and it does a really good job, I feel like, of presenting it. And so I laughed to my husband that I was like, I feel like I'm learning more about myself and what my perspective is on all this.
I absolutely think this is one of those introspective movies that because there's so many, like we haven't even scratched the surface of all the questions yet. And
oh gosh.
And yeah, it is so profoundly like disturbing in so many different levels.
Yes.
It is, you know, how these folks who are justifying the German people, just basically every German person that you come into contact will at some point in some conversation say, we had no idea.
You make it very clear, like, well, I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, or, you know, we were doing this for our country, not for this or what have you, you know, and it's just so, you know, it does make you think about these things. And
you do believe some of them. There's an element of like, some of them you're like, I don't think they knew what was going on. Though at the same time, you're like going,
you want to believe them, I guess is
that's
what I would say.
Oh, definitely.
And I mean, it's the conversations that we have with ourselves even still today, about things that, you know, we don't want to think about. You know, the reason that I'm gonna you know, follow with me. I'm not trying to offend anybody, and I'm not trying to equate anything. All right, but the way people feel when they have those god awful sad dog commercials with you know, Sarah McLachlan's Angel under it, right? Like, go ahead and tell me we don't know that there are dogs in shelters even without that. But we don't want to see it, and we don't want to have to think about it, because if we start thinking about that, then we have to start thinking about what kind of a society are we, where we have, you know, puppy
mills
and
what have I done
things
personally
like
about it?
Yeah.
Or is it my responsibility, or is it someone else's responsibility? Like,
yeah. And so we don't want to have those kind of conversations, so we don't think about it, and we're real kind of angry when someone pushes it right and directly into our face. And I think that's the same kind of thing that's going on here. On some level, these people have to know that something is going on. You know, there are concentration camps all over Germany.
And I think they make a point of saying that there was one only like 30 miles away or something. So like, it wasn't like it was crazy far away, but it still wasn't where everyone in town was going to it or anything like that. But at the same time, you're like, how can you not know right up the road, so to speak? Like,
well, and if you live in a town where there were Jewish people and then all of a sudden they all disappeared,
and you saw them rounded up, like, there's no way you didn't miss them. And like, what do you think's gonna happen?
Where do you think they went? Where, you know, do you think they took them to Disney World, which didn't exist yet? But, you know, I mean, it isn't something pleasant that's happening, because you can hear the rhetoric that is going around the country about Jewish people. So it, at some level, some molecular level, these people already knew. And what they are saying is that, no, nobody put anything directly smashed up in my face to remind me of it. But then I didn't go out of my way to look for that either, because I didn't want to think about it.
They even make a point of it. It's a really great moment in the trial, and I want to bring this up, is so you have your 4 defendants on trial, and they all kind of represent something within Nazi society at that time. But one of them says, after they show all the footage of the actual liberation of the camps, which is, it's actual footage.
It is from an actual liberation of a camp, which again is the first time that was shown,
especially on a big screen. Like, oh my gosh.
So it would, like today in 2023, you probably have seen some footage somewhere in some class at some museum at some whatever of people in concentration camps. But in 1961,
no.
You didn't see that stuff.
No. And so, like, right after they've shown that in the courtroom, one of the defendants says, well, how could they show that to everyone? How could they blame us for that? We didn't need to see that. Like, we just followed the law and we sentenced them, but we didn't see that. And I remember being like, what? Like, you sentenced them. You even, some of them you sentenced to death, and then them showing what they did, like
how it was carried out is
and it killed me because, okay, this is where I show my nerd background. That immediately when he's saying that, they're like, oh, I sentenced him, but I didn't execute them, so I shouldn't be held responsible for my actions. I couldn't help but go, oh my gosh, Game of Thrones. The very first episode, Eddard Stark has this like quote that he says, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so poignant in this one moment in this movie, because I was just so angry. Like, how can you say, oh, I judged them, but I shouldn't be held accountable for judging them because I didn't actually execute them, and how could they show us? And I was just...
Yeah. And the point Ned Stark was making in Game of Thrones with that was to teach his children that if you are going to sentence someone to death, you need to know what that entails, what that actually means.
Yeah.
And these judges are perfect examples of why that lesson needs to be taught. Yeah.
Exactly. That they wanted to ignore, like, oh no, I just did the sentencing, not the actual fulfillment of the sentencing.
I can't be held responsible for the actual deaths of these people. I just signed the warrant that made it happen. So that's very clear. I'm sorry, I keep coughing. I don't know that there's a cough button.
We'll add one. We'll record it next time.
All right.
But the whole movie, all the nuance, all the questions and everything like that. And I actually watched it over 2 days. And so the first day, I watched the first hour and a half, and it was doing all the nuance. And there was an element of almost defending why the Germans would have done this, or how they might not have known, or this or that. And, like, where do you hold people accountable? And I remember being like, I want to see someone held accountable. And then the second half was like, okay, now we're going to actually talk about the accountability and show the actual footage.
Because they showed the footage of the liberation of the concentration camps. And that was... I mean, the first time I saw it was when I was in grad school, because I had a professor who spoke highly of this film and of all of the meanings of it, which we'll talk about in a second. But the first time I saw it was in the 2000s, and it was still very shocking to see.
Yeah. Like, I knew I had read up before I watched it that it was gonna show actual footage, and I still there's something just so evocative. I don't know about watching that in that moment. And the whole thing is, the prosecutor, he himself was one of the liberators of the camp, so you can see where his righteous anger comes from, especially in that moment, because but then when you're seeing it, there's something about visuals. And especially knowing that was not actors; those were real people, and they show a lot of children, and it's really, really heartbreaking. And they even show, and this is when it's like really graphic. They show like bulldozers really pushing the bodies because they have to bury them really fast, because otherwise you have disease and all kinds of stuff. And those bulldozers, they admit, they're like, these are British like troops having to do this. So like literally the liberators of these camps having to come in and do something like that, which you feel just awful to do, but you know you have to do it in order to like
Save the ones that can be saved.
yeah, and it just
Yeah.
oh
And, I'll be quite frank in that, I've taken classes surrounding the Holocaust multiple while I was in grad school, so I saw a whole bunch of these things. I as a movie person, I've seen multiple movies, your Schindler's List, your, other movies about the Holocaust and all of these things. Band of Brothers is my weirdly comfort series that, that I watch when I want to feel better about the world.
things I didn't expect to hear when I woke up this morning.
So messed up, but they have a scene in there about liberating it too, and sometimes I get them all like jumbled in my head. But in a way, I think that's good because yes, it is stirring to see the actual footage, but what I have learned from this and also from attending oral history conferences where people talk about where historians talk about interviewing people who were liberators of concentration camps and how it stays with them forever. Like people who fought in the war, who had gone through just the worst battles of World War II, like the Battle of the Bulge, which is one of the longest and deadliest, highest casualty battles in the entire war. The thing that kept them up at nights when they went home was liberating these camps. And the smell.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And and that is all part of how could they not have known? It's willful. It's willful to not know. And that is, part of what they're trying to say here, I think. The reason that I've wanted to show Judgment at Nuremberg for years and years and years is because that same professor I had at UNT, she mentioned that, and it's appropriate because the next movie that we're going to cover on this series is the movie Selma. And Selma covers a voting rights march in 1965 and how the peaceful march is broken apart by state troopers who bring violence and beat them and tear gas them. And John Lewis, who was a famous congressman from Georgia, had a cracked skull during that, and it is called Bloody Sunday because the attack happened on Sunday. The march began on Sunday. It ended on Sunday because of the attack. It's called Bloody Sunday, and on that Sunday, I can't remember the exact date. I think it's like April 7th of 1965. The news broke in to the programming of the day on that Sunday, which was a Sunday night movie where they were showing Judgment at Nuremberg. So they broke into this movie showing for the first time on television, ABC's Sunday night movie, to show scenes of what had happened at the bridge that day in Selma.
Jeez.
The juxtaposition of a country that doesn't want to think about race issues and doesn't want to think about things that are happening in the South, having these pictures and video put directly in their face while watching a movie about Germans who don't want to think about the things that are going on in their own country. That juxtaposition is so important to the civil rights movement because what it then spurs is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 8 days later, before a joint session of Congress, LBJ gives the very famous "We can overcome, we shall overcome" speech, where he introduces and proposes the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which then becomes law and really changes things. So would it have, if it had been a different movie, would it have had the same effect? That's something that is, interesting to think.
God, yeah. Because the phrase I came up with by the end of the whole movie of Judgment of Nuremberg was, it wasn't even just about the truth of what happened. It was about owning the truth that, actually facing judgment for these events that happened, like owning their truth and rectifying the situation. And I remember being like, oh yeah, because it makes sense, because Germany today, like, they have huge laws about like no swastikas and no even like vaguely modified swastikas and things like that of nature. And I even was looking it up, and apparently they tried people who were anti-fascists in like 2014, 2015, like really more recent and everything, because they had a swastika symbol crossed out. But even the fact that they had the swastika at all, they were like, no, you can't do that. And they actually did then judge in their favor that clearly they were being anti-fascist, not fascist. And I remember just being like, oh, they own their truth eventually. But the movie's about them not wanting to kind of own the truth.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but be like, man, that's such a big deal, because after the Civil War, like, that's not what America does. We don't own the truth. We get the lost cause history instead. And,
Well, no, and in truth, we don't even own the truth about this Holocaust either, because and our role in it by
definitely
the eugenics and all of those kind of things. And the movie kind of introduces that because of the Cold War, we're not even gonna, no one's paying attention to this because there's other stuff. And this, very short attention span that we complain about in 2023, nobody pays attention, nobody remembers anything. And we're like, why can't it be like it was in the 60s? Well, in this movie, the short attention span is obvious. The reporters like, I can't do a story on these trials. No one cares about it anymore. The important people have already been put to death. We've moved on. Apparently, Czechoslovakia was revolting, and so you have. The Berlin airlift was happening at the same time, and so all of these things are contributing to like kind of pushing this aside and saying we don't have time to reckon with this. But if we don't, like I've said this numerous times in the last few months, but Brian Stevenson, who is the head of the Equal Justice Initiative, has said multiple times, and I quote him often, that that we can have truth and reconciliation, but in order to have truth and reconciliation, we have to recognize that those things must be done in that order. You have to accept the truth, reckon with the truth, or you won't have reconciliation.
Yeah.
And if we are moving on, push this aside, we don't have time to deal with this, we're going forward with the next thing that's coming up, then we never really reconcile with what's happened. And it will come back. It always comes back.
It will come back.
It always comes back. And we are living through that right now.
Yeah.
So,
no, it is. It was one of those. Oh man, because I'm tempted to have my students watch it at the end of the semester because it's so much. It has so much poignancy to today's world, even not necessarily looking at like a post-war world, but just truth, reconciliation, judgment, and understanding what needs to happen, even if we don't want it to happen. I will say that my one complaint about the movie The one complaint, because I have to have something like historical accuracies and everything like that. And obviously, it's not. It's based off of certain trials, but it wasn't actual.
It isn't. One specific. One,
it's technically some of the characters are fictional and everything like that, and so I had no problem with that because it did a good job of representing everything. Oh, I had a great quote that somebody wrote down that like it's not historically accurate, but it's historically correct. And I was like, oh, that's a good way to put it. Like, oh,
Yeah.
And I would say actually much of it was historically accurate still. But the one problem I had with it is the trial for the judges in Nuremberg and everything happened a year earlier than they have it happen in the film because they want it to happen in the film at the same time as the Cold War and
the Czechoslovakia thing
and I for anything that I could have taken out of the film, I'm like, I could have taken that out. And the only reason I say that is it felt like they wanted to add drama at the end of, like, basically there was this idea that, oh, maybe the judge shouldn't punish them as hard because we want Germany to basically come on our side when it comes to the Cold War, and we don't want to alienate the German people anymore. And it felt just like a little, obviously that didn't happen in that moment in history because they had already had the trial when this is going on. And so it felt like a little bit of just added, like, drama at the last minute. Will they, won't they?
Yeah, which really they didn't need.
And they didn't need that. That was the only thing. I didn't mind the Cold War aspect because I liked seeing the geopolitical issues and seeing these questions and issues of where do we want to alienate them or not. But I just didn't need it to be to that level at the end. Especially because the prosecutor himself doesn't quite flip. Like, he admits, he's like, they saw the truth at the end, and it's great. But there's a moment that he even is like, oh, maybe we shouldn't, like, try them as hard. And I'm like, no, you're the one guy that's been fighting for this whole time. Don't.
Someone that got drunk in the bar and was like, let's prosecute them all. I think before we end, we have to talk about the last line.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Because look, I'll be honest with you. Sometimes movies that I'm like, this is awesome, kind of, sort of, like fizzle at the end. But this movie...
Oh, it doesn't.
Does not fizzle. This movie, like, adds an extra gut punch right at the end.
All those themes that we were talking about, like the truth and reconciliation and like when and where and the nuance and like asking those questions. And then you have this last line in the film and you go, yeah.
Yeah. So just to, we've already covered that you shouldn't listen to us till after you've seen this movie. So we're going to spoil it and not even give you a courtesy spoiler alert. The end of the movie, the judge, before he leaves Nuremberg and goes back home, is asked by the defendant, Burt Lancaster, Ernst Janning in the film, to stop by and see him, and because these two men have earned each other's respect by then. And so he does. He stops by and sees him, and he gives him his case files and says, you'll be able to hang on to them, and they express this respect that they have for each other. And then Janning says, those millions of people, you have to know, I never thought it would come to this. I never thought it would come to this. I couldn't have known. There's no way I could have known. And Spencer Tracy says, do you want to deliver the line?
No, you deliver. You literally just watched it like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, because I needed to, because I was like, this is one that will stay with you. Even if you don't remember the exact words and have to watch it again, it will stay with you.
Yeah.
And the exact words that he said were, Mr. Janning, Herr Janning, it came to that. The first time you convicted someone and sentenced them to death who you knew to be innocent, it came to that. And I think that is also an important lesson about the Holocaust, and one that we have all of these movements with Holocaust museums and Jewish communities who are like, never again, and they want to teach it, and yes, teach the atrocities of the Holocaust, but the understanding that it doesn't just start with killing people, that it starts with your words, and it starts with classifying people as less than or other, and making it easy then later on for people to not pay attention when bad things happen to these people that you have already said are lesser than and are other. And so if you are willing to sentence anyone to death, even though you know in your heart of hearts that they have done nothing to deserve this, we've already passed the point of no return.
Yeah.
That's the beginning.
Yeah. No.
So, this movie, I love it. I'll swear by it.
It's great.
The only reason I'm sad that it's 3 hours long is because it's hard to convince people to watch it. But it's something that needs to be watched, and all
the acting is in it phenomenal.
Yeah.
All the writing is excellent.
The music is even kind of catchy.
Oh yeah. There's so much like relevancy. We haven't even we've scratched the surface on relevancy, because I was all like, oh man, straw man argument. What aboutism? And I'm like, there's so
all
much
of these
more.
Things, I think we could do like a whole series on this, but yeah.
Tell us if you want more on Nuremberg, and we'll see what we can do.
And smash that subscribe button.
Oh, we gotta rate it.
But before we go, we're gonna try something new. See if you like this.
Gosh.
To go with the Watch Wisely theme, and of course the wisest animal is an owl. We are going to rate this movie on the basis of 5, or did we say 10? 10 owls?
Oh, I was thinking 5 originally.
5. Okay, 5 owl system. A 5 owl system and what the rating is how relevant, important this would be to use in a classroom, right?
Yeah.
So
How
it's
useful it is
historical
in
a historical way. What is the relevance of this movie? And for me, I would give it a 5. 5 out of 5 owls.
I could go really cheesy here and give it 6, but I'm gonna go with you, 5. Well, you have to do it 5 times now, right?
Ooh. 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 Ooh.
Oh my gosh, I'm dying. Oh my gosh, yeah. But we're definitely rating it. It's so good.
It's so good.
And
Please
I would
watch
say
this movie. If you haven't watched this
historic.
movie yet, you need to watch this movie.
It'll make you think.
Yeah.
It's great.
So, thanks for listening to us, and we'll see you next time. Next time we'll be talking about Selma, and I'll bet we'll bring up Judgment at Nuremberg again.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for listening. Bye.